Imagine this. You're tied up inside a sack, alive. Alongside you are a snake, a dog, and a monkey, all crammed in. The sack is tied shut, lifted, and thrown into a river. As you all fight to survive, water rushes in. Eventually, you drown along with the animals. This wasn't from a horror story. It was a real form of punishment in ancient Rome known as pena culiae. And it's just one of many brutal ways the Romans dealt with people who broke their laws or challenged their rule. Today, we're looking at some of the harshest and most feared punishments used by the Roman Empire. These weren't just about ending someone's life. They were about making a public example. Punishment in Rome was a message. It was meant to show who held the power and what would happen if you stepped out of line. Let's start with one of the most well-known Roman methods, crucifixion. Many people associate it with the death of Jesus, but the Romans used it much more broadly. It wasn't just execution. It was suffering drawn out over time. Victims were nailed to a wooden cross, not through their hands but their wrists and ankles. That way, their bodies would hang longer without falling. Death didn't come quickly. Sometimes it took hours, even days. They struggled to breathe as their lungs filled with fluid, and they often died from slow suffocation. All of this happened in front of crowds. But crucifixion was just one method. Another was called scaphism, a punishment the Romans borrowed and used often. A person would be trapped between two boats or hollowed logs. Their body was smeared with milk and honey, attracting insects. Over time, bugs would swarm and feed on them. Death came slowly, often from infection. Burning alive was also used. People accused of treason, arson, or threatening the empire could be sentenced to die by fire. In some cases, they were locked inside a hollow metal statue shaped like a bull. A fire was lit underneath, and as they screamed, the sound echoed out of the bull's mouth, making it seem like the bull itself was crying out. These punishments weren't just executions. They were meant to terrify. The goal wasn't just justice. It was control. The Roman Empire wanted people to see what happened to anyone who resisted and think twice. Their message was simple. Challenge the empire, and your suffering will be public and unforgettable. It wasn't about punishing one person. It was about keeping everyone else in line. Rome may have been known for its power and architecture, but behind the glory was a system built on fear. Tortures like crucifixion, burning, and being torn apart by wild animals in arenas weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated displays to maintain dominance. These punishments weren't just brutal. They were meant to humiliate. If you were sentenced to die like this, it wasn't about justice. It was about making sure everyone knew you had been crushed by the system. And one of the harshest parts? The audience. These executions were public events. Crowds gathered to watch. The Roman leaders encouraged cheers, chants, and applause. The more painful and dramatic the death, the stronger the message: never cross the empire. You might assume this was reserved for common criminals. But in Rome, no one was off limits. Even high-ranking citizens, nobles, soldiers, officials, could face the same fate if they lost favor. Slaves, for example, couldn't testify in court unless they were first tortured. That was standard. Their words only mattered after suffering. It wasn't questioned. It was how the system worked. Even full Roman citizens weren't always protected. If someone important was accused of betrayal or seen as a risk to the emperor, their status didn't matter. They could be dragged into the public square, shamed, executed, and held up as a warning. One known case was Silvanus, a high-ranking officer under Emperor Tiberius. He was accused of plotting against the emperor. As punishment, he was executed in public. His body was dragged through the streets and thrown into the river. His children were also killed. His entire family was erased, not just as revenge, but as a clear message: don't even think about stepping out of line. This wasn't about individual guilt. It was about keeping control. These acts were tools, meant to protect the system, not just punish. Now here's the real question. Are we really so different today? We may not crucify people or burn them alive in public squares anymore. But does fear still shape our world? In many places, voices are still silenced. People vanish. Reputations are destroyed. Fear, shame, and power still go hand in hand. The style has changed. The tools are more advanced. But the tactic, using fear to stay in charge, hasn't gone anywhere. In that sense, the Roman Empire never fully disappeared. It just evolved. It's still around in the way we use fear to protect power and suppress challenges. The Roman Empire may have fallen centuries ago, but its methods of control, especially its use of fear, spectacle, and public punishment, still cast a long shadow over how power works today. The tools may be different, the execution less physical, and the stage more digital, but the core tactic remains: control through fear and silence through shame. What made Rome so effective at maintaining its grip on such a massive, diverse population wasn't just its armies or architecture. It was a message it sent every time someone was nailed to a cross, burned alive in a metal bull, or paraded through the streets in chains. No one is untouchable. No one is safe when they defy the system. It wasn't about guilt or justice. It was about making sure the next person thought twice. And that's what made Roman punishment so powerful. It wasn't personal. It was political. It was psychological warfare. And it worked. But here's the twist. These tactics didn't die with Rome. They've just been rebranded. We may not be cheering in amphitheaters anymore, but we do gather by the millions on social media. We watch careers implode in real time. We see reputations shredded and people silenced, not always through fair judgment, but through mass reaction and carefully planned exposure. Modern punishments don't always come with fire or iron, but they still leave scars, and they still serve as examples. Silencing dissent, isolating threats, making public examples out of those who step out of line. Sound familiar? We like to think we're more civilized now, that we've moved past the cruelty of ancient times. And in some ways, we have. Torture is no longer entertainment in most parts of the world. Laws exist to protect basic rights. But fear, shame, public spectacle, those still have currency. They still shape behavior. They still remind us who's really in charge. Whether the whistleblower crushed under pressure, a public figure humiliated into disappearance, or an ordinary person targeted in docks, the echo of Roman control is unmistakable. We still reward obedience with safety and punish defiance with spectacle. And that should give us pause. Because if we aren't actively working to be different, to break the cycle, to separate justice from vengeance and control from punishment, then we're just updating Rome's playbook. We're not advancing. We're just getting better at hiding it. The Roman Empire built roads, conquered lands, and expanded trade, but it also built a culture fear so effective, it lasted beyond its own existence. It created systems designed to keep people quiet, obedient, and afraid of stepping out of line. It crushed not only bodies, but voices and ideas. And for a while, that worked, until it didn't. Eventually, Rome fell, not because it wasn't strong, but because it became too focused on keeping control rather than listening, adapting, or evolving. And that's where we are, too. We're at a point in history where we have the power to choose which parts of our past we carry forward. We can learn from Rome's brilliance, its infrastructure, its ambition, its innovation, without repeating its darker instincts. But that takes effort. It takes awareness. And it takes a willingness to stand against systems that still rely on fear as their main strategy. Because when control is more important than truth, when shame is more important than understanding, and when silence is rewarded more than honesty, we start drifting backward towards something very old, very dangerous, and very familiar. So here's the real lesson from ancient Rome. Fear works until it doesn't. People eventually rebel. They grow tired of watching injustice dressed up as order. They start to speak, even when it's dangerous. They begin to see the cracks in the empire, even when the marble still gleams on the surface. And that's where history becomes more than just a story. It becomes a warning. The choice now is ours. We can choose to keep using fear to protect power. Or we can choose to build something better. Systems based on fairness, dignity, and truth. Systems that don't rely on turning people into examples or punishing dissenters into silence. That's not an easy path. It's slower. It requires listening. It means giving up some control. But in the long run, it creates something stronger than fear ever could: trust. So next time you see a public takedown, a viral humiliation, or a punishment that feels more about making a point than doing what's right, ask yourself, is this justice? Or is this just Rome? Again? Because the Roman Empire isn't just buried in ruins. It's alive wherever fear is used to rule. Let's not let history repeat itself. Not because we forgot, but because we chose not to change. Thanks for being part of this journey. Stay sharp, stay thoughtful, and above all, stay awake. And maybe that's the real takeaway from all of this. Power doesn't disappear. It evolves. It adapts. And if we're not careful, it keeps finding new ways to do old things. The Roman Empire left us more than ruins and legends. It left behind a blueprint, a warning wrapped in marble and blood. And it's still relevant today because fear still works. Spectacle still sells. Silence is still powerful. But we're not powerless. Each time we speak up, question the status quo, or protect someone from being publicly torn apart just for challenging a system, we chip away at that ancient legacy. We make space for something better, something based not on domination, but on understanding and accountability. So yes, learn from Rome, study its history, recognize its tactics, but don't repeat them. Don't become the crowd that cheers. Don't be the system that punishes truth. Be the one that breaks the cycle. Because if history has shown us anything, it's that empires fall, but ideas endure, and we get to decide which ones are worth carrying forward. Thanks again for watching, thinking, and staying curious. Until next time, question everything, learn constantly, and never stop standing up for the future you want to see.